Johnny Carson exposed the 9 genuinely malevolent Golden Age guests. For 30 years, Johnny Carson brought the biggest talents in America into people's living rooms all around the nation. His easy chuckle and welcoming smile gave the impression that viewers were catching up with old friends over coffee. However, Carson's smile frequently vanished as soon as the cameras stopped and the crowd left. Those closest to him claimed that America's favorite presenter maintained a mental blacklist of visitors he deemed to be genuinely awful people. According to a former Tonight Show producer who collaborated with Carson for more than 10 years, Johnny was the epitome of professionalism on camera. However, he would occasionally turn to Ed and mumble, "That person should never be near a camera or a child," as soon as we cut to commercial. Over his last years, Carson opened up more about the superstars he had secretly hated over his career. A troubling picture of adored figures who were monsters behind their meticulously constructed public personas is painted by the anecdotes he shared with close pals. Carson's comments about a great actress who seemed nice and fragile on his couch but had verbally abused a young production assistant backstage so severely that security had to step in were the most alarming. Additionally, Carson witnessed the well-liked male celebrity in his dressing area doing something so unsettling that the host almost phoned the cops. These weren't only demanding celebrities or challenging personalities. Carson claimed that these were truly evil individuals concealed by their talent and notoriety. For many years, the industry shielded predators, abusers, and manipulators. However, we must first comprehend why Carson's greatest hate and the intimate backstage altercation that no one has ever disclosed to date were directed at the first name on his list. First of all, I believe they are all aware of my stage fright. Secondly, I look for a movie that has an identifiable audience. The icy-blooded Hollywood queen, Joan Crawford. Viewers witnessed the graceful Hollywood icon they had admired for decades when Joan Crawford made an appearance on The Tonight Show in 1970. Crawford personified classic Hollywood glamour with her impeccable beauty, trained charm, and flawless posture. However, several Tonight Show employees claim that Crawford's off-camera conduct showed a completely different side of himself. "I have interviewed a lot of individuals, and she was one of the coldest." Years later, Carson reportedly told his biographer that Crawford's beauty started to cause issues before she even got to the studio, like speaking to a gorgeous statue that had nothing inside. Her requests included lighting specifications so specific that, decades later, the technical director of the show still retained the 4-page memo in his archives. According to a former producer, everything had to be exact. Her chair's position, Johnny's desk height, and even the studio's temperature exactly 67 degrees, not 66 or 68. Even though the event had award-winning makeup artists on site, Crawford brought her own cosmetics crew when she finally arrived, 3 hours before taping. However, Crawford's treatment of people differently according to their importance was what really showed her character. According to a stagehand who was there that day, she virtually curtsied to Johnny, but Crawford lost it when a young production assistant brought water into her dressing room without permission. Several witnesses claim that Crawford went on a rant so savage that employees in the corridor froze in disbelief. She allegedly referred to the assistant, a 20-year-old woman who was just beginning her career in the field, as a stupid little tramp and advised her to look for employment at a brothel where her lack of skills might be a strength. Crawford requested that the young woman be dismissed after she ran away in tears. Tension arose throughout the taping because Carson's producer refused. The most unsettling thing about Crawford's appearance, however, wasn't simply how she treated the employees, it was also how cunningly she changed the instant the cameras started rolling. She resembled a machine posing as a woman. Remembered. She had practiced every response and every giggle. At every impromptu moment, nothing was genuine. Crawford would suddenly lose her smile during commercial breaks and sit in stony silence, talking to no one, only to come back to life when the red light returned. Despite his reputation for making people feel at ease, Carson was unable to establish a genuine bond with Crawford. "I've interviewed corpses with more personality," he allegedly told Ed McMahon after the broadcast. It wasn't shocking when, years later, Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, disclosed that Joan had allegedly abused her adopted children. Close friends said that he only nodded and remarked, "I saw who she really was in those few hours." Every phrase is true. If Carson was startled by Crawford's calculating coldness, he was even more unnerved by his next adversary. Threatening and intimidating with raw power. I can respond to that by saying that I play Daphnis and Chloe at those beautiful times. Carson couldn't bear the charming tyrant Frank Sinatra. Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra seemed to get along well, even friendly, on TV. While Carson acted as the dignified host, the iconic singer would joke, share stories, and occasionally perform. However, behind the scenes, Carson reputedly detested Sinatra not because of his skill, which he admired, but rather because of the way the elderly blue-eyed singer treated people when he believed no one of importance was around. He would be a mob enforcer if he wasn't a singer. Several accounts claim that Carson once told a friend, but occasionally I believe he was both. The anxiety that Sinatra's Tonight Show visits caused was well known among the cast. An entourage of up to 8 men, described by long-standing employees as not show industry types but rather guys you wouldn't want to encounter in an alley, would accompany Sinatra when he arrived. These individuals would move around the studio, observing the employees and fostering an environment that one cameraman compared to being under surveillance. Carson, however, was very troubled by Sinatra's treatment of those he considered inferior. A floor manager made the error of giving Sinatra the customary 3-minute warning before his segment during one engagement in the early 1970s. Several witnesses said that Sinatra pushed the man in close while grabbing him by the tie and stating, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. When I'm prepared, I'll continue." The manager of the floor. A 50-year-old veteran of the Korean War was clearly rattled afterwards. Carson almost ended the segment when he spotted this exchange on his office monitor. He was only persuaded to go on by the producer's reminder of the ratings Sinatra would generate. The dependability, or lack thereof, of Sinatra was another point of contention. He allegedly abruptly canceled many appearances, including one where he was already in the building 2 hours prior to recording but decided he wasn't feeling it. The most revealing incident occurred during a commercial break when Sinatra made a nearly audible remark regarding the appearance of a female employee. He answered icily, breaching his customary professional distance, "Don't talk about my staff that way here." Sinatra was clearly shocked that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would confront him, and the tension was evident. Both men kept up their businesslike demeanors when the cameras re-entered, but crew members saw that Carson's questioning were significantly shortened and become less involved. According to reports, Carson instructed his producer after the appearance, "I don't care what his ratings are, limit him to once a year maximum." This is especially noteworthy because Carson hardly ever participated in reservations and almost ever explicitly barred visitors. His decision to limit Sinatra's appearances revealed how much he disliked the singer's actions. Carson's next troublesome guest exemplified a different type of challenging, the overbearing ego that knew no bounds or formats, whereas Sinatra exhibited the bullying side of star power. The claim that the planet is full now refutes what I'm stating. The top young filmmakers are all wet. The genius who believed that norms were beneath him was Orson Welles. Throughout the Carson period, Orson Welles made several appearances on The Tonight Show, consistently producing unforgettable television with his commanding voice, commanding presence, and inspiring tales from his illustrious career. At home, viewers witnessed a pleasant and intelligent raconteur. Something else caught Carson's and his team's attention. A man whose ego had become so big that he felt he was exempt from the standard television restrictions. After one very challenging Welles visit, Carson reportedly declared, "Never again." He believes he is still in charge of Rome. Usually, the issues started even before Welles got to the studio. Writers for The Tonight Show claim that Welles frequently rejected any planned questions or ideas that Carson's staff came up with. He informed us that our inquiries were. One former writer recalls that it was pedestrian and noticeable. He returned an empty page, physically crossing them all out. Given Welles' propensity to dive into long, meandering stories that were challenging to cut for time, Carson was placed in the awkward situation of having to interview one of the most important men in cinema without any planning or structure. Welles had a 7-minute stint scheduled for one appearance in the mid-1970s. He ignored several subliminal indications from Carson that it was time to wrap up and remained on the couch for about 25 minutes. A director stated that Johnny had a set of cues he used to let guests know when time was running low. Noticed them all and continued to speak. 2 other visitors had to be completely bumped. Welles was similarly contemptuous of the employees. Even when production helpers were standing right next to him, he allegedly refused to address them personally, instead using the third person. "I need more water, tell the girl." Or request that the boy change the brightness. According to many who knew Carson well, Wells' tendency to approach The Tonight Show more as his own personal platform than Carson's show was what particularly annoyed Carson. According to a previous producer, Orson would bring objects, abruptly switch topics, and even try to control camera angles from his seat. At one point, he got up and attempted to instruct our camera operators on the proper angles to employ. Johnny was furious. According to reports, Carson told Ed McMahon that one especially difficult appearance doesn't justify anything. "You do not have the right to take over someone else's show just because you are smart." Wells' disrespect for the limitations of television production particularly irritated Carson, who was a perfectionist himself. Although he continued to publicly acknowledge Wells' enormous achievements to cinema, in private he started to see him as a warning about what happens when ego overshadows brilliance. Wells symbolized the difficulty of managing an excessive personality, but Carson's next challenging visitor offered a distinct issue. Which, is the majority. The verbal aggression queen of Hollywood, Bette Davis. The iconic actress was at her most captivating when she made an appearance on The Tonight Show. She was full of intriguing Hollywood history, elegant even in her later years, and told humorous stories in her unique voice. The moments before and after the red light turned on, when Davis allegedly displayed a personality so harsh that even the unflappable Carson was surprised, were what they missed. Carson allegedly told Ed McMahon that she needed a courtroom, not a stage. Following one especially challenging appearance, Bette Davis shouldn't have to cross-examine anyone without a lawyer present. Multiple Tonight Show staff stories claim that Davis's handling of other guests was her first transgression. Davis would frequently shout over or interrupt other celebrities when they were booked on episodes with a lot of them, especially if they were women or younger performers. On the couch, she would physically turn away from other visitors. According to a former talent coordinator, you could see her fuming and making plans to regain control if someone else was sharing a story that made people laugh. Even worse was Davis's actions behind the scenes. Before appearances, she allegedly insisted on having whiskey in her dressing room. Although her alcohol consumption occasionally resulted in improper remarks and behavior, this was not unusual for guests of her day. Female employees who worked on the program in the 1970s said that Davis frequently used racist and sexist language, which was shocking even by the norms of the period. According to one makeup artist, Davis turned down her offer and requested someone whose hands didn't shake like they were coming off of a 3-day intoxication. Carson. Davis, who usually shied away from conflict, made an exception when she started reprimanding a cue card holder for moving too slowly during a rehearsal. Recalling a production assistant who saw the situation, Johnny genuinely intervened. "On this show, we speak to everyone with respect or we don't speak at all," he said to her in a very hushed voice. She backed down in shock, likely because she wasn't used to being pushed. Carson found Davis especially challenging because of the disparity between her unquestionable brilliance and how she treated other people. In contrast to other challenging visitors who could be written off as untalented, Davis was a true legend whose work Carson valued. According to reports, Carson warned his producer that was the last time she would appear on the show after her last appearance in the early 1980s. There is not enough time in life to be verbally abused by Bette Davis, regardless of how many Oscars she has won. Carson's next problematic guest offered a different kind of discomfort, behavior toward young ladies that went beyond professional bounds, while Davis at least aimed her jabs at adults who could defend themselves. The aged kid star with wandering hands, Mickey Rooney, huh? A living reminder of the golden period of the film industry, Mickey Rooney was a member of Hollywood aristocracy and the top earner from 1939 to 1941. His Tonight Show appearances ought to have been sentimental remembrances of a remarkable career. Rather, Rooney's visits became infamous for his outrageous behavior, uncontrolled energy, and occasional drinking, according to several staff testimonies. After one especially troublesome appearance in the mid-1970s, Carson reportedly told his producer that he believes his tiny stature gives him permission to be a pervert. Rooney, who was in his mid-50s at the time, gained a reputation among female employees for inappropriate touching, making sexual remarks, and disregarding professional boundaries. Several reports state that when young production assistants found out Rooney was booked, they would request to be replaced. When you brought him water, he would take hold of your hand. Attempt to draw you nearer. A former assistant who worked on the show in the late 1970s recalls, ask if you were married. He would cling to your wrist a bit too long if you attempted to depart. Rooney's apparent unable to identify when he had consumed too much alcohol was even more worrisome. Employees at The Tonight Show claimed that he was noticeably drunk on at least 3 different appearances, slurring words and losing his train of thought in the middle of sentences. In 1977, during one notorious part, Rooney started to narrate an anecdote about Judy Garland that soon got improper, so Carson interrupted him and changed the subject. Carson allegedly questioned his producer during the commercial break if he was intoxicated or if this was simply his current personality. Carson found Rooney especially challenging because of the age divide in perceptions of proper conduct. Rooney, who was born in 1920, grew up in a time in Hollywood where specific behaviors toward women were accepted, if not encouraged. According to a director who worked on the show for many years, Johnny was not a prude, but he had definite boundaries about professional behavior. When criticized for his actions, Rooney appeared truly perplexed, as if he didn't know why his actions were problematic. Following one performance in which Rooney repeatedly mentioned a young actress who was also on the show that night, Carson took the uncommon step of personally apologizing to her following the recording. The director recalls, "I have never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest behavior. He told her, that's how professionals act on my show and it won't happen again." True to his word, Rooney's appearances became less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Carson reportedly insisting on daytime pre-tapings rather than live evening broadcasts when Rooney was booked. While Rooney's behavior created uncomfortable situations, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of difficulty, demands so extensive and unreasonable they became legendary among the staff. I don't sing. My last marriage was one day and I didn't sing it. Lost it. Zatsa Gabor, the diva who drove Carson to despair. With her glamorous appearance, distinctive accent, and flirtatious personality, Zatsa Gabor was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Carson's tenure. Viewers saw a charming, over-the-top personality who played up her Hungarian background in many marriages for laughs. Behind the scenes, according to numerous staff accounts, Gabor was one of the most demanding, difficult guests in the show's history. I'd rather interview a cat, Carson reportedly quipped, after a particularly exhausting Gabor appearance. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting. Gabor's demands began long before she arrived at the studio. According to former Tonight Show employees, her standard requirements included a specific temperature in her dressing room, 74 degrees, fresh flowers, orchids only. No carnations. A bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes. Her own lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. No female guests who were younger than 40 booked on the same episode. Her writer read like a parody of celebrity demands. Recalled a former talent coordinator. We thought it was a joke the first time we got it. When these requirements weren't met exact, Gabor reportedly would refuse to leave her dressing room until the situation was rectified, often delaying taping and throwing off the entire show's schedule. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Gabor arrived for a taping and discovered the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. According to multiple witnesses, she got into a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct product. Johnny had to intervene, a former producer remembered. He called her directly and said something like, "Zaza, honey, you look beautiful already and we have a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." What particularly irked Carson about Gabor's behavior was how it affected the overall production. Crew workers would have to put in extra hours, other guests would be kept waiting, and the meticulously organized timetable of the performance would be thrown into disarray. According to reports, Carson instructed his executive producer, "The next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show, starring Zaza Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick," following an appearance in which Gabor complained about her introduction after arriving 40 minutes late. The fact that Gabor remained on the show during Carson's tenure in spite of these annoyances is evidence of her indisputable entertainment worth when the cameras were really rolling. While Carson's next difficult guest provided a different kind of anguish, Gabor's diva demands caused logistical issues. Erratic conduct that has the potential to swiftly transform a friendly interview into an awkward altercation. Oh, the annoying mother. The unpredictable powder keg, Shelley Winters. A two-time Oscar winner, Shelley Winters' career spanned decades, ranging from glamorous roles in her early years to character roles in her later years. She should have been a perfect guest on tonight's show because she was accomplished, experienced, and plenty of Hollywood anecdotes. In actuality, Winters was one of Carson's most erratic guests, according to those who worked on the show. Shelley remains silent. She blows up. According to Carson, Winters' incapacity or reluctance to adjust to the light caused her to become notorious among the show's personnel following one very explosive visit. Late-night television format with an emphasis on entertainment. She would frequently launch into passionate political tirades or intensely personal confessions that made Carson clearly uncomfortable, rather than offering humorous anecdotes or promoting ongoing initiatives. A straightforward inquiry about a recent movie during one visit in the mid-1970s swiftly turned into Winters giving a 5-minute unbroken diatribe against government corruption, leaving Carson unable to come up with a humorous way to switch to a commercial. According to a former director, Johnny was an expert at managing talks, but he found it difficult to control Shelley. He could only wait for her to exhaust herself once she started. Winters' erratic behavior extended beyond the subjects of her conversations. She also gained notoriety for her violent outbursts. When fellow guest Oliver Reed made sexist remarks on a British chat program, she famously tossed a glass of whiskey in his face. Every time she was booked, the personnel of tonight's performance was anxious due to her reputation for being volatile. Inexplicably, Over would vanish before her segments. Despite these difficulties, Winters stood out from some of Carson's other challenging visitors because her actions appeared to be motivated by true enthusiasm rather than ego or malice. She viewed every public appearance as a chance to speak out about the political and social problems that were very important to her. Whether the setting was suitable or not, Carson, although obviously uneasy in her more passionate moments, nonetheless had some regard for Winters' sincerity. Carson reportedly told his producer, but in the later years of Carson's tenure, Winters became less frequent, with the host preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's format, following one particularly vehement appearance in which she criticized the Vietnam War. While Carson's next challenging guest represented something he personally thought repulsive, Winters' impassioned unpredictability produced issues on air. Extreme political opinions directed upon marginalized groups. Like red core puffless and large muscles. The star whose politics Carson couldn't stand, Jane Russell, is attractive, and I like her. With roles in movies like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The Outlaw, Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most recognizable sex icons of the 1940s and 1950s. Her remarkable beauty and important role in movie history made her an obvious choice to return to The Tonight Show on a regular basis. Russell, however, rarely returned to Carson's couch after a few visits in the early 1970s. According to show insiders, this was because Carson was uncomfortable with her reported treatment of LGBTQ+ staff members and her increasingly strong political views. Despite having been a moderate Republican for the majority of his life, Carson strictly adhered to The Tonight Show's policy of remaining impartial on contentious political matters. However, Carson was concerned about Russell's alleged use of backstage conversations to voice hardline conservative opinions. Johnny was able to deal with visitors who held varying political views. An ex-producer clarified. He found it offensive when those viewpoints were used to disparage other visitors or employees personally. Numerous reports claim that Russell gained notoriety for his derogatory remarks toward the LGBTQ+ cast members of the program. She is accused of ordering a replacement lesbian makeup artist to touch her face during one occasion in the early 1970s. An alleged event involving Rock Hudson was much more worrisome to Carson. A talent coordinator who worked on the show claims that Russell made disparaging remarks about Hudson's sexual orientation, which was well known in Hollywood circles at the time but not publicly acknowledged, and refused to be booked on the same episode. Among the many gay friends Johnny had were a number of employees. The talent coordinator remarked that by refusing to allow such discrimination on his show, he was ahead of his time. During a 1973 performance, Carson allegedly made disparaging remarks about civil rights legislation during a commercial break, which was the last straw between her and Russell. Her comments were overheard by multiple crew members and apparently made it to Carson's ears, while not being captured on broadcast mics. Russell was conspicuously absent from The Tonight Show's guest list for the rest of Carson's tenure following that appearance. Carson seems to have personally vetoed future bookings in one of the few definite instances. Carson's customary unwillingness to simply reject guests, especially those with Russell's level of star power and historical relevance to Hollywood, was what made this situation especially noteworthy. It was clear how deeply he disapproved of her actions that he took such a firm stand. His last and possibly most vehement hate was saved for a comedian whose public image and private conduct were supposedly very different, even if Russell's views and treatment of employees caused a lasting schism with Carson. I've never asked you this before, but I'm asking you to just hold it for a moment. Carson described the comedian Jerry Lewis as genuinely vicious. One of the most popular entertainers in America, Jerry Lewis was a pioneering comedian, actor, director, and philanthropist who was well known for his yearly telethons to support research on muscular dystrophy. He was a worldwide celebrity due to his frenzied energy and physical humor. According to multiple Tonight Show staff members, Lewis was also one of Hollywood's most challenging and unpleasant stars behind the scenes, earning him a particular spot on Carson's personal blacklist. He is the result of ego overriding talent. Following a particularly problematic Lewis performance in the mid-1970s, Carson reportedly warned a co-worker. Lewis apparently made no secret of his contempt for Carson personally, in contrast to some challenging visitors who reserved their worst behavior for subordinates. Lewis frequently interrupted Carson during one notorious engagement, took over questions meant for other guests, and even leaned over and changed Carson's tie without permission, a move that clearly irritated the usually composed host. Rule, a former producer explained. Johnny must initiate contact before you touch him. Despite being aware of this, Lewis used it as a power move. Lewis allegedly treated crew personnel even worse. Regardless of their seniority or experience, he would reportedly refuse to learn staff members' names and instead address to them as "hey you" or by their role, such as camera guy, makeup artist, or girl. During Lewis's practice, a camera operator apparently coughed softly, which was a particularly unsettling experience. Several witnesses claim that Lewis abruptly stopped everything and began to rant, yelling that the cameraman should be kicked out of the studio since he was a professional but breathed like a child. According to a floor manager who was there, Jerry yelled at a camera operator for breathing too loudly. The poor guy had allergies, he was breathing and not talking. The disparity between Lewis's public image as an unwavering advocate for children and his private actions toward those who could not further his career was what Carson found most offensive about him. According to a producer who worked closely with Carson, Johnny's skin crawled during the Jekyll and Hyde routine. Watch Jerry sob about loving children at his telethon, then come to our show and treat folks like they're less than human. Never again, Carson reportedly informed his executive producer following Lewis's last Tonight Show performance in the early 1980s. Although it was uncommon for Carson to explicitly reject guests, Lewis became one of the few celebrities who were essentially barred from the show in its last 10 years. Years later, at a private dinner, Carson was asked about Lewis and apparently replied something that stunned everyone with its unusually harsh tone. He sticks out as genuinely hostile in a community full of fakers. And it requires effort. What the real nature of Hollywood is revealed by Carson's blacklist. A rare, unvarnished look into Hollywood's reality behind the meticulously preserved facade of glamour and charm is provided by Johnny Carson's personal thoughts about these 9 challenging guests: Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Bette Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zsa Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis. Everything was visible to Johnny. A veteran Tonight Show producer explained. He served as a conduit for all major stars to reach the American people for 30 years. He could tell who was acting and who wasn't. The fact that Carson had no motive to embellish or fabricate unfavorable tales made his evaluations very insightful. Carson was at the very top of the entertainment business, not some sour-faced employee with a grudge or a tabloid reporter. He stood to lose everything if his candor harmed his chances of getting invited, and he had nothing to gain by insulting these celebrities. According to his former producer, Johnny had no intention of creating enemies. On the contrary, he wanted every interview to be successful. He didn't like people because they had made it hard for him to not like them. Carson had a unique view on celebrity culture because of his dual roles as a gatekeeper and a confessor to the stars. For 30 years, celebrities shared aspects of themselves on his sofa that they would never otherwise display, fostering a relationship of trust that increased the importance of Carson's personal assessments. The distinction Carson made between visitors who were simply challenging and those he deemed to be seriously problematic is possibly the most illuminating. He put up with uneasiness, quirkiness, and even a little ego. It came with the area of celebrity to comprehend these. Cruelty, particularly to people in a position of less authority, was something he could not tolerate. Recalling his longtime director, Johnny had a straightforward test. How did they handle the helpers and pages? The men operating the cameras. He learned all he needed to know about a person's character from it. Many of Carson's personal beliefs have been supported by more general disclosures about these celebrities in the years since his passing in 2005. Numerous sources have supported Christina Crawford's claims regarding her mother Joan, Sinatra's alleged ties to organized crime, and tales of Mickey Rooney's inappropriate behavior. This implies that Carson wasn't only passing judgment, rather, he was identifying real character defects that Hollywood's public relations team had gone to great lengths to hide. The most depressing thing about Carson's blacklist is how well the studio system shielded these superstars even though industry insiders were aware of their actions. Before social media and cancel culture, celebrities could keep up impeccable public personas while acting reprehensibly in private, safe in the knowledge that the media, networks, and studios all had a stake in keeping them marketable. A former Tonight Show writer once said, "One cell phone video could end a career today." The narrative would never leave the building as long as tickets were being sold, even if someone threw a chair at an assistant back then. Carson's candid observations are a helpful reminder that our cultural heroes have always been flawed as we nostalgically recall Hollywood's heyday. Complex individuals who, behind their meticulously constructed public appearances, can be really unsettling, inspirational, or disappointing at times. According to his longtime producer, Johnny used to comment, "The camera adds a layer of fiction, not just 10 pounds. Finding the reality beneath the deception was his greatest talent, not merely conducting interviews. We appreciate you viewing this examination of Johnny Carson's most challenging visitors. If you thought this exploration of television's golden period was insightful, please subscribe and like this video for more in-depth analyses of the history of entertainment. The cast members of the popular sitcom from the 1980s were covertly tortured by the child star, whose adorable on-screen antics concealed violent outbursts so severe that producers built emergency buttons on set. If you were stunned by the discoveries in tonight's show, wait until you watch our next video. To ensure you don't miss this shocking Hollywood exposé that will be released next week, click the bell symbol.